Where's Bree Mom? Here go Bree Mom right here. Let me see. Show your bring it down some. No, bring it down some. Cause I got bring it down some. Yeah. There's Bree's mom. My baby sister. Baby sister. Where's AJ holding up her son? Is AJ holding up her son? Yes. But I don't know where she is.
I'm gonna need y'all to hear.
What's up, y'all? I'm Dream Dog Bree father, and I just want to say rest in peace to my baby girl. And to her cousins that was driving, I told y'all don't be riding with her. She don't need to be riding with y'all. Y'all just doing too much. And who's that fourth person? Talking about a hairstylist. Why am I hearing this shit last? I don't know what to do. Send y'all prayers, y'all. Cause I'm ready to ride them. When I figure out who did it, they say they got somebody, but I don't believe that's the person. I don't believe that's the person. But if it is, I'm going to jail myself. I'm going to jail myself. I'm gonna figure out something.
The second phone call was the one that broke the family. For 3 days, they had lived inside a nightmare, but at least there was still hope. Brianna Johnson, known to thousands online as Dream Doll Bree, had already lost her life. Her cousin, Arthur Lee Johnson III, better known as A.J., was still fighting. Every hour that passed without another devastating update gave the people who loved him one more reason to believe he might survive. Then July 8th changed everything. A.J. died from the injuries he suffered during the early morning ambush in Miramar, Florida. Just like that, the investigation transformed. This was no longer a shooting that had claimed one young life. It was now a double homicide. And strangely, just as investigators were trying to piece together what happened, another voice entered the story. Not a detective, not a witness speaking through police. A hairstylist. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Every story we tell here represents a real family still living through unimaginable pain. If you believe these victims deserve to be remembered as more than headlines, take a second to subscribe to 3 a.m. Files, like this video, and turn on the notification bell. It helps us keep telling these stories with the care they deserve long after the cameras disappear. When people hear the words double homicide, they usually focus on a number: 2 victims, 2 families, 2 funerals. But investigators hear something completely different. 2 stories that may never be fully told. When A.J. passed away, detectives didn't just lose another victim. They lost another perspective. If he noticed something before the shooting, if he recognized the car, if he saw someone's face, if he heard a name, those memories may now be gone forever. That's one of the cruelest realities of violent crime. Evidence can explain what happened. Sometimes only people can explain why. As the investigation became more complicated, social media became even louder. Questions multiplied. Rumors spread. People started naming names. Speculation traveled faster than facts. Then, after days of silence, someone many people have been talking about finally decided to speak. The hairstylist. For several days, her name had been circulating across Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. People wanted to know one thing. Who was she? More importantly, what did she know? In a lengthy public statement, she explained that she had been with Brianna and the group earlier that evening. According to her account, the night began like countless other nights among friends. There was a birthday celebration. There was laughter, pictures, music, plans to continue the night. Nothing about those early moments suggested that just a few hours later, 2 21-year-olds would be dead. She also described an earlier disagreement involving people connected to the group, but from her perspective, that situation had already been resolved. She believed everyone had moved on. That's a statement worth remembering, because sometimes the most dangerous person in a conflict isn't the one still arguing. It's the one who stopped talking. The hairstylist statement wasn't just a response. It was an attempt to stop a story from running away without her. By the time she spoke publicly, her name had already become part of the conversation. Social media had done what it often does after a high-profile crime. It began filling in the blanks before investigators had the chance to. People were asking where she was, what she knew, and whether she was somehow connected to what happened. Instead of staying silent, she decided to tell her side. According to her account, the group spent part of the night celebrating at a birthday party before heading to Kikun nightclub. It sounded like the kind of 4th of July weekend thousands of young people across South Florida were having. Friends getting together, taking pictures, laughing, enjoying the holiday. Then she mentioned something that immediately stood out. She said there had been an earlier confrontation involving people connected to the group, but in her mind, it was over. She believed whatever disagreement had happened had already been settled. That's where this case becomes psychologically interesting. One of the biggest mistakes people make after conflicts is believing everyone leaves with the same emotional state. They don't. Two people can walk away from the exact same argument, carrying two completely different worlds inside their heads. One person goes home thinking, "We're good now." The other spends hours replaying every word that was said, every insult, every perceived act of disrespect, every moment they believe crossed a line. Detectives know this. That's why they don't just investigate the shooting itself. They investigate everything that happened before it. Arguments, phone calls, text messages, who left together, who stayed behind, who seemed unusually quiet. Sometimes violence doesn't begin when the first shot is fired. Sometimes it begins hours earlier, long before anyone realizes they're in danger. According to the hairstylist, she was dropped off before the shooting happened. If that's accurate, then she was inside the Lamborghini when the attack occurred. Instead, like everyone else, she learned about the shooting after it had already happened. But another part of her statement caught people's attention. She admitted that, during confusion immediately following the shooting, she mistakenly gave Brianna's family the wrong name while trying to understand what had happened herself. Later, she publicly apologized. That admission changed how many people viewed her statement. Some saw honesty. Others became even more suspicious. The truth is, trauma often creates confusion before it creates clarity. After violent events, people scramble for information. Phones begin ringing. Screenshots are shared. Names start circulating. Rumors spread from one person to another until no one can remember where they started. It's one of the reasons detectives are careful not to treat the first version of events as the final version, because memory under stress is rarely perfect. Then came perhaps the most talked about part of her statement. She said she believed A.J. was the intended target. Notice exactly what she said. She didn't claim police had told her that. She didn't present it as an established fact. She presented it as her personal belief after everything she had experienced. That distinction matters, because belief and evidence are not always the same thing. Investigators still have to determine whether the attack was directed at one specific person, everyone inside the Lamborghini, or whether the motive lies somewhere else entirely. But her words introduced a possibility that immediately changed how many people began looking at the case. If A.J. really was the intended target, then Brianna may become an innocent victim of someone else's deadly mission. And if that isn't true, then detectives still have an even bigger mystery to solve. One thing, however, was no longer in doubt. 2 young lives had been lost, and the answers their families desperately needed still hadn't arrived. Then, just when it seemed the case couldn't become any more heartbreaking, another father spoke. But unlike the hairstylist, who was trying to explain what she remembered about that night, A.J.'s father was trying to protect something else. His son's name. Within days of the shooting, social media had already started creating its own narrative. Some people were suggesting that A.J. had gang ties. Others hinted that the attack must have been connected to some kind of criminal lifestyle. There was one problem. None of those claims had been confirmed by investigators. For A.J.'s father, staying silent wasn't an option. He spoke publicly and made one thing absolutely clear. I raised those kids. He rejected the idea that his son and Brianna were troublemakers, pushing back against the growing wave of assumptions spreading online. Think about how painful that must be. Your son is fighting for his life in a hospital. Then he dies. And before you've even had the chance to bury him, you find yourself defending his character. Psychologically, that's something we see more often than people realize. When violent crimes don't have an obvious explanation, Many people instinctively search for one. Sometimes that search leads them to facts. Other times, it leads them to stereotypes. It's almost as if accepting that innocent people can become victims feels too frightening. So the mind looks for something that makes a tragedy feel easier to explain. But explanations built on assumptions rarely bring anyone closer to the truth. If anything, they push families even deeper into grief. As investigators continue working the case, another consequence of A.J.'s death became impossible to ignore. The investigation itself had changed. This was no longer a homicide investigation with two surviving victims. It was now a double homicide, with only one survivor left inside that Lamborghini. That matters, not just legally, but practically. Every surviving victim carries pieces of story that nobody else can tell. Every conversation, every glance, every strange feeling, every detail that seemed unimportant in the moment can suddenly become critical once detectives begin reconstructing those final minutes. When A.J. died, investigators lost access to another first-hand account of what happened inside that vehicle. That's something forensic evidence can never completely replace. A camera may show where a car was. Cell phone records may reveal who called whom. Ballistics can determine where bullets traveled. But none of those things can answer a simple question like, did you recognize the person in that car? Sometimes the smallest memory becomes the biggest breakthrough. And sometimes that breakthrough disappears forever. Meanwhile, public attention remained fixed on another question. If the hairstylist believed A.J. was the intended target, why? What had she seen or heard that led her to that conclusion? At this point, we simply don't know. She shared her belief publicly, but investigators have not confirmed that theory. And that's where responsible reporting becomes important. There's a difference between documenting what someone says and presenting it as established fact. The first helps us understand the different perspectives surrounding a case. The second risks misleading people before the evidence has been fully examined. As frustrating as uncertainty can be, detectives cannot build a case on beliefs. They build cases on proof. And until that proof emerges, the biggest question in this investigation remains exactly where it was on the morning of July 5th, who was the shooter, and what was the real motive. Then came a video that changed the conversation once again. Not from a detective, not from a prosecutor, not from someone claiming to have solved the case. It came from the one person whose world had been shattered beyond repair, Brianna's father. When he went live on Facebook, there was no prepared statement, no carefully chosen words, no media training, just raw emotion. The first thing he said was simple: rest in peace to my baby girl. For a brief moment, that's all the live stream was. A father saying goodbye to his daughter. But grief has a way of moving without warning. Within seconds, his mind wasn't on the funeral. It was back on the night Brianna died. And to her cousins that was driving, I told y'all don't be riding with her. She don't need to be riding with y'all. That sentence has been discussed countless times online. Some people heard blame. Others heard regret. But psychologically, it sounds like something many grieving parents experience after sudden loss. The mind begins replaying the final decisions, the final conversations, the final warnings, not because changing them is still possible, but because the brain desperately searches for one moment where the tragedy could have been prevented. It's one of grief's cruelest habits. It keeps asking impossible, what if, questions long after the answers no longer exist. Then his attention shifted again. And who's that fourth person? Talking about a hairstylist. Why am I hearing this last? That question immediately caught people's attention. Remember, by this point, social media was moving faster than the investigation itself. People were posting screenshots, sharing rumors, naming people, creating timelines. Imagine trying to understand your daughter's final hours while millions of strangers are discussing them online before you've had the chance to process them yourself. Whether every detail he had heard was accurate or not wasn't the point. The point was that he felt left behind. Like everyone else seemed to know pieces of his daughter's story before he did. Ironically, not long after that live stream, the hairstylist publicly released her own account. She explained where the group had gone that night. She described the birthday celebration, the stop at Kikun nightclub. She said she believed an earlier disagreement had already been resolved. She stated that she had been dropped off before the shooting and denied any involvement in what happened. She also publicly apologized after admitting she had mistakenly shared the wrong name with Brianna's family during confusion immediately following the shooting. Those were her statements. Investigators have not publicly confirmed every detail she shared, nor have they publicly stated that her personal belief about who may have been targeted reflects the findings of the investigation. And that's an important reminder. People closest to tragedy often carry different pieces of the puzzle. Each person's account can help investigators, but no single account becomes a complete picture on its own. As Brianna's father continued speaking, the pain in his voice became impossible to ignore. He told viewers to pray for him because he didn't know what to do. He spoke emotionally about wanting justice and expressed feelings of overwhelming anger toward whoever was responsible for taking his daughter away. Those weren't investigative findings. They were the words of a father experiencing one of the darkest moments a parent can endure. Then, almost as if the anger gave way to heartbreak, he said something that stopped many people listening. "My child's supposed to bury me. I ain't supposed to bury them." That may be the single sentence that defines this entire case. Not the Lamborghini, not the theories, not the speculation. Just a father trying to make sense of a loss that no parent should ever have to face. As detectives continue searching for the people responsible, that sentence remains a reminder of what this investigation is really about. Behind every piece of evidence, every surveillance video, every interview, and every headline is a family waiting for the day they finally hear the words they've been praying for. We found the people responsible. Until that day comes, the questions remain. And somewhere, someone knows the answers. There are cases that are solved with a confession. Others are solved with DNA. Some are solved because one witness finally decides they can't carry the truth anymore. Right now, the Brianna Johnson and A.J. Johnson case hasn't reached any of those moments. Instead, what we're left with are three voices that continue to echo long after the gunfire stopped. The voice of a hairstylist trying to explain her final hours with the group. The voice of A.J.'s father fighting to protect his son's reputation from rumors before the funeral had barely begun. And the voice of Brianna's father, a man whose Facebook Live wasn't an interview or a press conference, but the sound of a parent collapsing under the weight of unimaginable grief. Three voices, three completely different perspectives. Yet they all point toward the same reality. Two 21-year-olds are gone. One survivor is left carrying memories of a night that changed countless lives. And somewhere beyond the headlines, detectives are still trying to answer the only questions that truly matter. Who did this? And why? When we study violent crime, it's easy to become consumed by the mystery, the suspect, the motive, the timeline, the evidence. But sometimes we forget that every investigation leaves behind something investigators can't measure. Psychological scars. Families often spend years replaying the final conversations they had with their loved ones. Friends question decisions that seemed ordinary at the time. Parents wonder if one more phone call, one more warning, or one different choice could have changed everything. Those questions rarely disappear, even after an arrest, even after conviction, even after justice is served. That's because grief isn't solved the way cases are. It simply changes shape. This case also reminds us how dangerous the internet can become during an active investigation. Within hours, theories were spreading across social media. People claimed to know the motive. Others claimed to know the suspects. Some pointed fingers at survivors. Others targeted people whose only connection to the case was being present earlier that evening. The hairstylist found herself answering questions she never expected to face. A.J.'s father found himself defending his son's character instead of simply mourning him. Brianna's father found himself trying to understand pieces of his daughter's final night through social media. That's the world we live in now. Information moves faster than investigations, but speed doesn't create truth. Evidence does. And that's why it's important to separate what has been confirmed from what has merely been suggested. As of this recording, investigators have described the shooting as targeted, but they have not publicly announced a motive or identified who, if anyone, was the intended target. Statements made by family members, friends, or other individuals reflect their personal perspectives unless and until they are supported by evidence released by law enforcement. That distinction matters, not just for the investigation, but for justice itself. So before we leave you tonight, I want you to think about something. If you were one of the detectives assigned to this case, where would you focus your attention? Would you spend more time reconstructing the group's movements from the birthday party to the nightclub and beyond? Would you examine every phone call and text message made that night? Would you focus on the surveillance footage, looking for a vehicle that may have followed the Lamborghini? Or would you believe the answers lie with someone who hasn't spoken yet? And here's an even more difficult question. What responsibility do we, as the public, have while an investigation is still unfolding? Is it enough to simply share every theory we hear? Or do we owe victims and their families the patience to let evidence speak before speculation becomes someone's accepted truth? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them, and respectful discussions often raise questions that many people never consider. If you appreciate true crime that goes beyond the headlines, stories that examine not only what happened, but the people left behind and the psychology that shapes these tragedies, subscribe to 3 a.m. Files and turn on the notification bell. The truth doesn't stop waiting, and neither do we. Until next time, lock your doors.